Welcome to the Strange Land podcast. My name is Kenny. I'm your co-host. I'm here with my friend Stefan. How you doing tonight?
Doing great. How you doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm doing great.
Awesome.
So before we start this, I want to talk about where we're at online and where you can find the podcast at. You can go to our website, which is strangelandpod.com. You can go to our SoundCloud, which is SoundCloud / Strangeland Podcast. You can also find us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and basically every app that has podcasts. Every popular podcast app, we should be on it. And if we're not on it, we'll be on it very soon. So find us on there.
Go subscribe, everybody.
And also check us out on Facebook, which is just, Facebook. If you just search up the Strange Land Podcast, it'll come up. So today we're covering a pretty big case. This was a gigantic case that lasted decades, and I want to give a small disclaimer first. This is bad. We're going over some pretty horrific stuff, and we're not going to censor any of it. I think most of it has to be said, and so just get ready for that. Just you're warned that this is a pretty gruesome one. So last episode, we spoke about Casey Anthony. In Casey Anthony's case, it was not a very satisfying one because most people don't agree with the verdict. No justice was served. And the case we're talking about tonight spent most of its time in similar circumstances. The man we are talking about spent over 30 years staying just out of the reach of law enforcement, while at times being right under their noses. His first murders happened in the winter of 1974, and he was not arrested until the beginning of 2005, just over 30 years. During this time, he would kill 10 people and took multiple breaks from killing, leaving the city of Wichita, Kansas, in fear for when he would strike again. We are talking about Dennis Rader, better known as the BTK Strangler, and that stands for Bind, Torture, and Kill, which is exactly what he did to his 10 victims.
So Dennis Rader was born on March 9th, 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and he also grew up in and around the Wichita area. He's the oldest of 4 sons, born to Dorothy Mae Rader and William Elvin Rader. He seemingly had a very normal childhood, but what we will later see in this case, he was very good at separating his personal life from his murderous life. And that's actually a trait you see a lot in serial killers. Oh, yeah. They call it compartmentalizing things. Okay. Like they're able to detach almost like a separate person in a way, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Definitely.
Anyway, his murderous tendencies actually start as a child. In many reports, even in his own confessions, he admits to torturing and hanging small animals as a child. So after high school, he enrolled in college, but dropped out to join the Air Force. He spent 4 years in the Air Force from 1966 to 1970. Upon discharge, he moved to Park City, where he worked in the meat department of a Leaker's IGA supermarket, where his mother was the bookkeeper. And while he was working at this supermarket, he actually married a woman named Paula Dietz on May 22nd, 1971, and had 2 children. He then attended Butler County Community College in El Dorado, earning an associate's degree in electronics in 1973, and then enrolled in Wichita State University and graduated in 1979 with a bachelor's in administration of justice, of all things.
Yeah, the irony continues for the rest of the case, and actually continues right here.
Yeah.
He worked at the Wichita-based office of ADT Security Services from 1974 to 1988, where he installed security alarms as part of his job, in many cases for homeowners concerned about the BTK killings. Rader was a census field operations supervisor for the Wichita area in 1989 before the 1990 federal census. He became a dog catcher and compliance officer in Park City. In this position, neighbors recalled him being as sometimes overzealous and extremely strict. One neighbor even complained he euthanized her dog for no reason. Rader was a member of Christ Lutheran Church and had been elected president of the church council. He was also a Cub Scout leader. During this time, as a Boy Scout leader, he would teach the Boy Scouts some of the knots he used in his murders. And So, and he was a very normal family man. He had 2 kids. He had a wife. He, told his kids to watch out for the BTK. He warned his kids to not let anyone in the house, to stay on guard whenever they went places. He was a president of the church council. He was a Boy Scout leader. He would go on fishing trips, camping trips with the Boy Scouts. He would lead this church. Everyone trusted him. And if you listen to his in-court confession, he sounds like the most normal person ever. He sounds like people we work with. He has a similar voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a similar voice to people that I know. And he looks, if you Google his image, you'll see him in court. He does kind of look, kind of menacing, and he was a big dude. But for most of his life, he was known as a very nice guy.
Yeah, and in interviews too, didn't they say he was just like no sense of humor at all? Couldn't make the guy laugh or anything.
Yeah.
Very serious.
Yeah. So, and one interview with someone who worked at his church, she said, he was the guy that I would want to walk. If I had to walk down a dark alley at night, he was the guy I would take with me.
Wow.
Yeah, he's the guy I'd be like, yeah, Dennis Rader, come, you follow me, you protect me.
No truer statement has ever been made.
Yeah, and that's how little people knew.
Yeah, he really was good at that compartmentalizing.
Oh, yeah.
It's really amazing.
Yeah, and to talk more about that, that's something that it's like he had kids, right? Well, he murdered kids, as you will find out in this case. So it's like he didn't care about that, but of course he's warning his kids about the BTK killing. So yeah, he completely separated his family life and his murderous life.
Yep.
As you said, like 2 different people.
Rader typically targeted women, though he did kill or attempt to kill men and children on a few occasions. He would search through Wichita until he found a potential victim and enter their homes through home invasions. The kills were highly premeditated. He would stalk his victims, so beforehand he could know who was home, where, obviously when they came home, if they lived with anyone else, what they did at nighttime, what their hobbies were. He even would follow them to work. Yeah, so like I said, the kills were highly premeditated. This guy knew everything about his victims. On these trips to stalk his victims, he would actually bring what he used to call a hit kit, which held items used to kill in the break-ins. Some stuff that he would put in there is duct tape, rope, a screwdriver, which he would all then put in a briefcase or a bowling bag. It would change depending on his particular hit or project, as he would call it. He would also cut off the phone lines to prevent the victims from calling 911 or making any sort of last-ditch effort to get help. He did not, however, make a habit of bringing his hit kit until after his first few murders, initially using objects from the house. He also wore what he referred to as his hit clothes to the murders and later dispose of them.
Yeah, Dennis Rader would use a .22 caliber Colt Woodsman handgun, a .357 Magnum, and a knife to threaten his victims and gain control of them. On 2 occasions, he also masturbated on the victims' bodies. The victims were typically tied up, sometimes using items from their houses, and killed by strangulation, either manual or with a ligature, or suffocation with a plastic bag. When he strangled his victims, he would do it repeatedly as a form of torture and become sexually aroused from watching them struggle. In the case of his 5th victim, Catherine Bright, he tried to strangle her, but stabbed her with a knife instead when she struggled too much. He also took souvenirs, such as underwear from his female victims, driver's licenses, and personal possessions. He had a habit of nicknaming his home invasion plans in a manner similar to the way military operations are codenamed. The Catherine Bright home invasion was called Project Lights Out, and Vicki Wegerle's murder, Project Piano, because he liked listening to her playing the piano.
Very interesting.
Yeah, very, very creepy.
So I guess now we'll actually start on the murders themselves, starting from the first one, and then work our way through the list here. So, Rader's killings began on January 15th, 1974, with 4 members of the Otero family. Joseph Otero, the father who was 38 at the time, Julie Otero, the mother who was 33, Joseph Otero Jr., who was 9 years old at the time, and Josephine Otero, who was 11. So these killings started with Rader focusing on Mrs. Otero and the daughter Josephine. He had ideas on what he was going to do with them. He had stalked Mrs. Otero before and figured out when she would be home and when Mr. Otero would be out. The day he decided to go through with it, Mr. Otero was home with a broken leg. He had sustained in an auto accident. Rader thought that Mr. Otero was gone because his car wasn't at the house, and it was at the auto shop because of the accident, obviously. So he expected Miss Otero and her daughter to be home alone. When he got into the house, he actually found that Mr. Otero and 2 of their kids, Joseph and Josephine, were there. Rader initially got into the house because Joseph Jr. had opened the door for some reason, and after watching the house for some time that day, Rader then made his move and forced his way into the house. So when he got in, he pulled a pistol on Mr. Otero. He told them that he was a wanted criminal in California and that he was only there because he needed money, food, and their car. So he could get away, obviously. He was running from the law. So this was his ruse that he would later use to tell most of his victims, just to calm them down and try and put them at ease. So the family had a dog, and Rader saw that the dog was a problem. The dog was barking immediately. So at that point, he had Mr. Otero put the dog outside, and he took all 4 family members after that to the back of the house and tied them up, starting with the father, Joseph Otero. The family was putting up a bit of resistance, but not that much. They wanted to stay compliant. They were trying to be as reasonable as possible. They just didn't want to get hurt in any way. The father actually had a cracked rib from the auto accident, so Rader actually tried to make him as comfortable as possible, putting a pillow underneath his head as he tied him up. So as he started this process, the family started to complain that the rope around their wrists was too tight. So Rader complied and loosened them up just a bit, again to make sure they felt more at ease. The family said they would give Rader whatever money they had, whatever food, and their car. At this point, Rader realized that he wasn't wearing a mask, and anyone in the family could identify him once he left. So that was the moment when he decided no one would live in that house.
Yeah, and so, again, this is in 1974, so this was his first attempt at any kind of murder. And he was already losing control of the situation. You know, he, again, as Stefan said, he hadn't expected everyone to be home, or almost everyone. We found out that, we do find out that 2 of their children weren't home, luckily. So he wasn't expecting everyone to be home. So he put a plastic bag around Mr. Otero's head and wrapped some cords around his neck to keep the plastic bag in place. And next he went over to Mrs. Otero and started to strangle her. He had never strangled anyone before, so he didn't know how much pressure to give or how long to strangle her. So when she initially went out, he thought he had killed her. The children were in the room at this point, watching a Rader kill their parents. After Mrs. Otero passed out, he went to the daughter, Josephine, and strangled her until she passed out as well. He then went to the son and put a plastic bag over his head and tied it shut in order to kill the 9-year-old boy. At this point, he realized that Mr. Otero had been able to rip a hole in the bag over his head and was able to breathe. So Rader took a t-shirt that he found in the room, put it over Mr. Otero's head, and retied another bag over his head so he couldn't rip the bag again. After that, Mrs. Otero had woken up and was upset and confused. She saw that her son had a bag over his head and pleaded with Rader to save his life. Rader went and took the bag off the son's head, and then he went and strangled Mrs. Otero to death with a cord. Once she was dead, and the father was dead as well, he went and killed Joseph Jr. by putting a bag over his head and tying it off. By the time he'd killed Mr. and Mrs. Otero and Joseph Jr., Josephine had woken back up. Rader took her down to the basement, hung her from a drainage pipe in the basement. As he watched Josephine die, he had sexual fantasies and masturbated. After this, he went through the house, cleaned everything up. He also took Mr. Otero's watch and a clock from the house. I assume, for souvenirs, because we did find out that, he will take souvenirs from, I'd say, most of his murders. I mean, he said he couldn't remember exactly why he took them, but, I think it was to sort of relive, after he had killed, he did this for sexual pleasure, so he wanted to keep going back and reliving everything. So I think he would, maybe he'd pull out the watch and remember, like, oh, yeah.
In court, the judge asked him why he took things, and then more specifically why he took the watch and the radio, and he said he took the watch because he needed a new watch. That's what he said. So next, we're going to talk about Catherine Bright. So BTK's next murder would take place on April 4th, 1974, just a few months after the Otero family. Catherine Bright was a 21-year-old female that he had been stalking and watching, basically. On April 4th, he would make his move. He broke into the house when she was gone and waited in her bedroom for Catherine to come home. When she did come home, she was with her brother, Kevin Bright. This, like the Otero murders, was an unexpected guest. When he approached them, he basically told them the same story as the Otero family. He was wedded in California. He needed a car, some food, and money. Again, he would say these things to put them at ease, basically. He wanted to make sure that they felt safe. It's said that he didn't bring any of his own materials or his hit kit for this murder. When asked if he had brought his hit kit, he stated that he couldn't remember, but probably not, and then boasted if he had brought his hit kit, then Kevin wouldn't have survived, and then made sure to say at the end that he wasn't bragging, it's just a matter of fact. So he had Kevin tie up Catherine, and then he tied up Kevin afterwards. Once Kevin was tied up with his hands bound and his feet bound to the bedpost on the floor, Rader moved Catherine into another room. He tied Catherine up and then went back to Kevin to strangle him. Rader got down on the floor and attempted to start strangling Kevin, but Kevin was actually able to break free from his bonds. He was able to loosen one of the knots and actually begin to fight with Rader. So Rader had brought 2 handguns with him, and while him and Kevin were fighting, he took out one of his handguns and shot Kevin in his face. Kevin went down. Rader saw blood everywhere, so he assumed that he had killed Kevin, and then went back into the room to deal with Catherine. The bonds he had used on Catherine weren't very strong either, and she was actually able to break free. So after a tussle back and forth with Rader as he's trying to strangle her and she's basically fighting him the whole time, he was actually able to get the best of her after a while and strangle her. Once he thought she was going to die, he heard movement coming from the other room. He ran back, and Kevin actually wasn't dead. He met Rader in the hallway, and they started to actually fight again.
Yeah, and so Rader had a .357 Magnum in his shoulder holster, and Kevin was able to get a hold of it, but the gun had jammed when he tried to shoot Rader. Once the gun hadn't worked and Rader realized this, Rader grabbed his .22, which he had brought along with his, with his .357, and shot Kevin again. This time, Kevin went down, and Rader, of course, believed him to be dead. He's already shot Kevin, twice. Rader then went back into the room with Catherine to finish her off. He started to strangle her, and she was putting up too much of a fight, so he pulled out the knife he had brought and stabbed her 11 times in the ribs and in the back. She was dying, and there was blood all over the bed. He then heard more movement coming from the other room. He thought it was the police, and he thought he was about to get caught, and he walked out expecting the police to be there. But then he saw Kevin running through the through the front door. Rader cleaned up the place real fast and then ran out the front door. He saw Kevin running down the street, and he tried the keys to both Kevin and Catherine's cars that were in the driveway, but couldn't figure out which ones would work. So he decided to run down the street, down the alleys to his car, which was parked at Wichita State University. He was able to get to his car and get away. And Catherine died from her stab wounds. Kevin ended up living.
That's a miracle. Really, being shot twice, let alone in the face.
Yeah, the face.
And being able to get away.
And Rader thought he was dead both times. He shot him one time. He went down. He thought Kevin was dead. Went in to try to, strangle Catherine. Heard movement, went back out. Shot him again. Thought he was dead a second time. Went in, killed Catherine, went out, saw Kevin running out the door. It's insane.
Guy's a fighter.
Guy's a beast.
Yeah. So it would be 3 years after the murder of Catherine Bright before Rader would make his next kill. Rader often took multiple year breaks throughout his serial killer, his spree, if you will. Mainly because he had a family, his 2 children and his wife. Like we said before, he was a Cub Scout leader and a major presence in his local church. So his next killing would take place on March 17th, 1977. So the woman he killed went by the name of Shirley Vian. She was 24 years old, and she wasn't his original intended victim for this case. Across the street from Vian was his original victim that he had been stalking. He believed that the original victim was home, so he went to the door, knocked on it, hoping that he could somehow force his way in with his ruse that he has used every time. However, no one answered at all. At this point, Rader got frustrated and basically had to kill someone at this point. So he started going through the neighborhood. He came across a young boy playing outside of his house. He actually pretended to be an investigator and showed him a picture of his own wife and children, asking if the boy had seen them at all. The boy answered no, and Rader went on his way to another house. No one answered at that house, and he saw that the boy was going into his house. He decided to follow him. So he followed the boy up to the door, and after the door was closed, he knocked again. The boy answered and got his mother. Rader pulled out the photo that he had shown the boy previously and asked if they could ID them, the people in the photo, which of course they wouldn't, because it was his own family. At that time, that's when he pulled out his .357 and basically forced his way in.
Yeah, he told Shirley that he had sexual fantasies that he needed to work out, and he was going to have to tie her up, and he might have to tie up the kids. And so he started to try to tie up the kids, but decided that was just going to be too difficult. They're putting up too much of a fuss. Obviously, some huge strange man, forces his way into the house and tries to tie up the kids. They're not having that. So he convinces Shirley to help him lock the kids in the bathroom. Shirley had 2 young boys and a girl. He tied one of the bathroom doors shut and also pushed a bed up against the other door. Shirley had stayed home sick that day with the flu, and she actually threw up. And Rader had gone and got her a glass of water and tried to comfort her as much as possible. He also put blankets and toys in the bathroom with the kids to help them try to relax. He then tied up Shirley and proceeded to strangle her with the rope that he had tied her up with. After Shirley had passed, He packed up all his things, cleaned up as best he could, and left the residence and ran to his car, which is a few blocks over. While all this was happening, the children were locked up in the bathroom and heard it all. The oldest boy had ended up breaking a small bathroom window with something he found in the bathroom and ran around the house, through the front door, and into the bedroom where his mother was laying dead.
I also saw in a later interview, he talks about this, the oldest child,
Really?
and he said that he could somehow like force his way through the door just a tiny bit, a tiny crack, and he actually saw his mom being killed by Rader.
That's awful.
Yeah. So Nancy Fox is our next victim in this case. So after he killed Shirley Vian, 8 months later, he would go and kill Nancy Fox. So this happened on December 8th, 1977. Nancy Fox would end up being killed. She was 25. Rader saw Nancy Fox walking up to her house one night while he was out trolling for his victims. He would go to her mailbox so he could find out her name, and eventually found out where she had worked, which was at Hellsberg. So he went up there to check her out and to size her up multiple times. When he was ready to act on his potential victim, he parked a few streets away from her house, walked to her house, knocked on the door a few times to make sure no one was there. And when no one answered, he went around back and then cut the phone lines to the house. He then broke into her house and had waited there for her to arrive. When she arrived home, he told her a similar story, and also now that he had some sexual problems that he had to work out, and he was going to have to tie her up and get it over with. Obviously, she was really upset at this point. So when she heard this, he actually had to spend a lot of time to try and calm her down to ease her conscience. He actually took her out back and let her smoke a cigarette while he went through her purse. As they got done, he said she looked at him and said, "Well, let's get this over with so I can call the police." She has to go to the restroom first. She went in, and he told her that when she came out, she needed to be undressed. So when she came out, he put her in a pair of handcuffs that he had brought in his hit kit. He took her to the bedroom and then tied her up to the bed with a rope and with pantyhose that he had found in her drawers. He then took off his belt and strangled her to death with the belt. He also masturbated while doing this. Once he was done and Nancy Fox was dead, he then went through her house, cleaning up any messes he may have left, taking her personal possessions. And these were things he just wanted to keep as souvenirs to remember her by. After that, he left and took his car.
So after the killing of Nancy Fox, Rader would take an 8-year break. And, we spoke earlier about this. He would take breaks. He would take breaks for, big changes in his life. He would also, whenever his kids were doing stuff, he had to raise his kids. He had to be a church leader. He had to be a family man. So he would take breaks. And he would also take breaks, I think, whenever he may have gotten scared. He may have gotten scared that he was going to get caught. He may also have taken breaks when he didn't feel like he was as satisfied with a murder. That's something that he has hinted at in the past. So again, after the killing of Nancy Fox, he took an 8-year break. His next killing would come on April 27th, 1985. The victim's name was Maureen Hedge, and she was a 58-year-old female. She was quite a bit older than his other victims. Most of his other victims were in their 20s. So this was, she was 58, so almost twice as old as any other victim. Maureen Hedge actually only lived a few houses down from Rader. He had seen her many, many times in the past, and would even, wave and act very casually and neighborly with her, and he would, conversate with her, very casually. These circumstances would give him an easy access to her, and he would be able to keep a close eye on her. So, he didn't have to go trolling necessarily to find this victim. She lived just a few houses down.
Yeah, I think he's getting bolder too at this point. Like it's now he's killing people on his own street.
Yeah, and also it could have been the fact that he took an 8-year break. He's like, you know what, I need somebody. She's right there.
He's probably walking by with his wife, and waving to her, and at the same time thinking and plotting.
Oh yeah, and that's really creepy.
Yeah.
So on the night in question, Rader had been at a previous commitment, and after he was done, he put on his hit clothes and drove his car to a bowling alley, which was a few blocks away from Marine's house. He caught a taxi, and the taxi drove him to her house, or really slightly down the street from her house, and he had his hit kit with him in a bowling bag. He walked to her house and noticed her car was there, but he thought that she usually wasn't home at this time. So he snuck in very quietly, like a cat burglar, before realizing that she was indeed not home. So not very long after he snuck in the house, though, he heard the door rattling, and he ran into the back room. He heard her come in with a male visitor, so he waited for the male visitor to leave. Once he left, he continued to wait for hours while she was getting ready for bed, and getting into bed to go to sleep. Eventually, he came from where he was hiding, went into her room, and flipped the lights on. He rushed over to Marine and started to strangle her with his bare hands. She screamed, but eventually he was able to kill her. He then put her on a blanket, tied her up, and rolled the blanket around her and tied it up around her. So now she's cocooned in this blanket, tied up. And this is the first instance where he didn't want to keep her at the house to be found. He wanted to take her somewhere. So after stripping her naked and tying her up, he took her and put her in the trunk of her car and drove the car to the church that he was the leader at. He strung her up at that church and took photographs of her in various bondage positions. He then masturbated on her and moved her back to the car, putting her back in the trunk, and he found a place off a nearby highway to dump her body in a ditch. He then got rid of his hit clothes and made his way home. And so this is pretty obviously insane. He takes this woman to the church where he is the leader of, hangs her up in bondage positions, and takes photographs of her. It's absolutely insane. And yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a certain point where you stop and think where did these ideas even come from? What was
years, eight years of fantasizing,
right?
And where it comes from.
Possibly his whole life. You know what I mean? I don't think that ever stopped. But the church aspect is interesting to me. Why take her there of all places?
Probably because it was a place that he had a key to.
Right.
That he knew
somewhere secure.
Yeah, it was somewhere secure. He had a key to. He knew every nook and cranny of that place. Right. So he knew. I'm sure he had fantasized at some time in the past of taking someone there, just for the reason that it was, this. Oh, no one's gonna know that I had this dead girl in the church, and everyone's gonna come in next Sunday and worship, and they'll never know, and
right.
I'll be
it's
sitting.
It's even more of a thrill.
Almost. It's this inside thing that only he knows of, but it turns him on vastly, and so I think that's probably a big part of it. He gets to just imagine what they would do if they found that out, but he doesn't want them to ever find it out. So
right. I also think too, his style of killing it. There's definitely an obsession with control. He definitely. I don't know, but it's strange too, because he also has this very caring side, right? He has a pillow for Mr. Otero.
Well, he only does that because he wants to keep them as calm as possible. I don't.
It's
really
all
think,
manipulation and control, one way or another.
I don't really know if he's caring at all. I don't really think he is. He just wants them to stay as calm as possible.
Right.
And so at that point, when he gives the pillow to Mr. Otero in his first series of murders, I don't think he gave a shit about his Mr. Otero's head or his ribs or whatever. He just didn't want Mr. Otero to freak out and
Right.
try to get free. And
Whatever it was going to take to control somebody, whatever tactic it took, that's what he was going to do, basically.
Yeah, definitely.
Crazy, man. So his next victim after Marine Hedge would be Vicki Wegerle. This would occur about a year and a half on September 16th, 1986. Vicki was a 28-year-old female that Rader had found while going through his usual methods of picking out his victims. He found her while he was out trolling, as he would call it. And he stated that... he stalked her and waited for the perfect opportunity to arise. Rader went to Vicky's house under a ruse that he was a telephone repairman, and he drove his car a few blocks from her house, dressed in his hit clothes, walked to her door, and then knocked on the door. Rader told Vicky that he needed to check her telephone lines and make sure everything was working properly. So she lets him in. After he actually checks the telephone wires, and he admits in his statements that he used like a fake device that he made to check her telephone wires. He tells her everything is working properly. And it's at this time when he pulls out the pistol and forces her to go to the back room with him. She fought pretty hard, and the dogs in the backyard were going absolutely crazy. She also mentioned how her husband would be coming home soon. So he ties her hands behind her back with what was in his hit kit, and then strangled her with pantyhose he had found in her house. So after he was done, he took pictures of her and then left the house pretty quickly because he didn't want to get caught by her husband. So he takes her keys and then uses her car as the getaway car.
Yeah, and this one was pretty quick and smooth, I think, for Dennis Rader. Because I think we've noticed, I don't know, if you read online, you see a lot of people calling Dennis Rader he's an intelligent serial killer, but not really, because he's messing up on a lot of his murders, he messes up on a lot of them. And with this one, it was pretty quick and easy. I think he really found satisfaction in this particular murder.
Right, and you also have to think too, it's 1986, right? 12 years after his first murder. He's getting older. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't have the stamina that he used to. He wants to get in, get out, get his fix, and be done with it.
Yeah, so after Vicky, he would wait and take another break for 5 years before killing again. And his next victim was 62-year-old Dolores E. Davis, and this is another, older lady. And Dolores would actually be his final victim. On this particular night, Rader had prior commitments he was attending to, and once he was done with those, he drove to change his hit clothes and then drove and parked his car a few blocks from the house and walked to the house. Rader could tell that Dolores was home, but everything was locked up and he couldn't figure out how to get into the house. So he just took a cement block and threw it through the window in her house, and climbed in through the window. And like you said earlier about him being bold,
yeah,
he doesn't even he doesn't care anymore at this. He just throws cement blocks through windows.
Yeah, he hasn't gotten caught this far. He's not getting caught now in his eyes.
No,
so.
He threw a cement block through the window. You know how much noise that would make?
Yeah, and it's sort of amazing also that no one else heard this whole.
Yeah, it is super amazing that didn't happen. So Dolores came to where the crash had come from, and she actually thought a car had smashed into her house. Rader confronted her and told her a similar ruse about how he was a wanted convict and he needed food and a car and any cash she had on her. He would put her in handcuffs and try to reassure her that nothing bad was going to happen to her and try to get her to calm down. While she was handcuffed, he went to her kitchen to search for food, found the car keys, and located where her car was at. He then went back to where Dolores was, took the handcuffs off, and tied her up. He then proceeded to strangle her with some of her own pantyhose. He took pictures and did his normal routine, and then decided that he wasn't going to leave her at her house.
The whole next part of this gets kind of confusing. So he takes Dolores, wraps her up in a blanket, and puts her in the trunk of her own car. He then drives her car, he drives her to an unknown spot, drops her off, and has another commitment he actually needs to get to. So he then drives her car back to her house, walks to his car, changes into his normal clothes, and then goes to his commitment. So after he's done, he then drives back to her house, cleans up, makes sure everything is okay. At this point, he actually finds a gun that he had left by accident in the entranceway where he actually broke the window. And I thought this was weird too. He actually, as he walks out and the house is clean, he actually takes her car keys and throws them on top of her roof, which I thought was weird. Why would you do that? He then walks back to his car and goes up to pick her body up from where he dropped her off. He takes her to another location and then drops her off. Presumably it was a ditch somewhere off the side of a highway. So he then gets clean, drops off all of his hit clothes, and then and then goes from there. He's done. He's, as far as he's concerned, gotten away with it.
Yeah, that's the most insane one ever. And like we said, this is his last killing, and without ruining anything, because I'm not, he didn't get caught because of this, which is insane. He's so bold, as we said, to throw a cement block through a window, and then he drops a gun in her entryway or wherever. He drops a gun in her hallway or something, finds the gun later, does all this stuff. I mean, what if he didn't go back and find the gun? And then why does he even decide to take her anywhere? Like, he takes her to one place, drops her off, changes clothes, goes to this commitment, maybe a church commitment, right? Maybe a family gathering, who knows?
Yeah.
And then gets in his own car, goes and picks up the body, and takes the body to another location. This is the most insane one yet.
He is sort of everywhere and sporadic at this point.
I feel like this particular murder was that of a drug addict. And they've never really said he was on drugs, but this one, he was just all over the place, man. He didn't know what he was doing.
Right.
I don't know. But again, so Dolores Davis was his last victim. So as we said in the past, Dennis Rader's killings, they began in 1974, and they ended with Dolores Davis in 1991. And as we have shown, he took multiple multi-year breaks during this period. He would not be caught until 2005, 14 years after his final murder. Rader was particularly known for sending taunting letters to police and newspapers. He authored many communications from 1974 to 1979. The first was a letter that had been stashed inside an engineering book in the Wichita Public Library in October 1974 that described in detail the killing of the Otero family in January of that year. From a payphone, he called a news station and told them, where they could find the letter. The news station phoned the police, and the police went to the library and found the letter. Rader sent this letter to the police because 3 men had come forward and claimed responsibility for the Otero murders. Rader did not want anyone taking credit for any of his murders. In a letter sent to a TV station, KAKE, in 1979, Rader claimed responsibility for the murders of the Oteros, Catherine Bright, Shirley Vian, and Nancy Fox. In this letter, Rader gave himself the nickname the BTK Strangler, as well as many other nicknames that he wanted the police force to choose from. He also told them that he had his eye on a new victim, and that if they didn't release this information to the public, he would move quickly. He wanted the public to know that the BTK killer was on the loose in his city. He wanted them to be terrified. He felt he had control over the entire city. The police force went with the name BTK and quickly announced that there was a serial killer on the loose.
He sent another letter in 1979 to an intended victim of his, Anna Williams. The letter featured a poem, "Oh Anna, Why Didn't You Appear?" As well as a drawing for what he had intended to do to Anna, as well as some small items that he had taken from her home. Before this letter was sent, Rader had waited several hours inside the home of Anna Williams, but left when she didn't come home. So an extremely close call for Anna Williams. I can't imagine, like, finding out after the fact must give you at least a little bit of paranoia there.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, that goes for, his intended victim and before, where he just, he went to the person he had been stalking, and she wasn't home, so he just chose someone else.
Right.
This is the same thing almost. He went inside Anna Williams' house and waited, and she just never came home, and I guess he just moved on with it.
Yeah, I mean, imagine like being a citizen of Wichita and then having the fear of knowing that there's a serial killer in your area, and then amplify that by having this serial killer come to your house, sending you your own items.
Oh my God, yeah.
I mean, you can only imagine the sort of psychological torture that, this girl had to go through because of it.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
So in 2004, the investigation of the BTK killer went cold. Then Rader began a series of 11 communications to the local media that actually led directly to his arrest in February 2005. In March 2004, the Wichita Eagle received a letter from someone using the return address of Bill Thomas Kilman. The author of the letter claimed that he had murdered Vicki Wegerle on September 16th, 1986, and enclosed photographs of the crime scene, a photocopy of her driver's license, which he had stolen from her at the time of the crime. Before this, it had not been definitively established that Wegerle was killed by BTK. In May 2004, television station KAKE in Wichita received a letter with the chapter headings for the BTK story, fake IDs, and a word puzzle. On June 9th, 2004, a package was found taped to a stop sign at the corner of 1st and Kansas in Wichita. It had graphic descriptions of the Otero murders and a sketch labeled, "The Sexual Thrill is My Bill." Also enclosed was a chapter list for his proposed book titled The BTK Story, which mimicked a story written in 1999 by Court TV crime writer David Lohr. Chapter 1 was entitled A Serial Killer is Born.
So, in July, a package was dropped into the return slot at the downtown public library containing more bizarre material, including the claim that he was responsible for the death of 19-year-old Jake Allen in Agornia, Kansas, earlier that month. This claim was false, and the death was ruled a suicide. In October 2004, a manila envelope was dropped into a UPS box in Wichita. It had many cards with images of terror and bondage of children pasted on them, a poem threatening the life of lead investigator Lieutenant Ken Landwehr, and a false autobiography with many details about Rader's life. In December 2004, Wichita police received another package from the BTK killer. This time, the package was found in Wichita's Murdoch Park. It contained the driver's license of Nancy Fox, which was noted as stolen from the crime scene, as well as a doll that was symbolically bound at the hands and feet with the plastic bag tied over its head. In January 2005, Rader attempted to leave a cereal box in the bed of a pickup truck at a Home Depot in Wichita, but the box was at first discarded by the owner. It was later retrieved from the trash after Rader himself asked what had become of it later in a later message. Surveillance tape of the parking lot from what the date revealed a distant figure driving a black Jeep Cherokee leaving the box in a pickup.
In his letters to the police, Rader asked if he sent a floppy disk to them, if it would be traceable. He didn't want to communicate anymore with actual letters and thought it would be easier this way. The police answered his question in a newspaper ad that was posted in the Wichita Eagle. They told him it would be safe to use, and surprisingly, he believed them. On February 16th, 2005, Rader sent multiple purple 1.44 megabyte Memorex floppy disks to Fox TV, KSAS TV in Wichita. Under investigation, the police found metadata embedded in the floppy disk itself. So there had been a Microsoft Word document on this disk that had been deleted, and they were actually able to see the metadata contained in this floppy disk, and some of the things they found were Christ Lutheran Church, and that the document had last been saved by someone named Dennis. So after doing internet searches, they found out someone named Dennis Rader was president of the church council. From the footage found when BTK left the cereal box at Home Depot, they knew the BTK drove a black Jeep Cherokee. They were able to find out where Dennis Rader lived, and then at that point, that's when they saw the black Jeep Cherokee in his driveway. At this point, they knew they had something solid and they had someone to pin these murders on. At this point, obviously, the police had very strong circumstantial evidence. They had a smoking gun, and they got it in this way. They actually even obtained a warrant to test the DNA of a pap smear that Rader's daughter had taken while she was a student at Kansas State University. The Kansas Bureau of Investigation processed the DNA at their lab in Topeka and demonstrated a match to the DNA sample that had been taken from underneath the fingernails of Vicki Wegerle. This indicated that the killer was either the brother or the father of Dennis Rader's daughter. In this case, it was Dennis Rader himself. This gave the police enough to make the arrest.
Yeah, and so let's go back over that again, just to make it clear to everyone that's listening. So he didn't want to send letters anymore. So he wanted to give the police a floppy disk. He actually asked the police if they would be able to track it back to him, in which case they said no. Of course, they were lying, And, it's possible if he had gone to the store and went and bought a new computer and some floppy disks, he probably wouldn't have gotten caught, right?
It's a good chance.
This is a good chance he would, but he didn't do that. And I think this whole thing is so amazing. It shows that he's not very smart at all.
Yeah.
It's just that he is not very smart. He gave them a floppy disk, and it showed, like you said, in a deleted Microsoft document, the metadata showed it was from Christ Lutheran Church. So it's like they found that. They did some simple investigating. They looked it up, and as it was last saved by Dennis, they saw Dennis Rader was a name on the church, on the website for Christ Lutheran Church. They already knew the BTK drove a Jeep. They went to Dennis Rader's house, saw the Jeep. It's amazing.
I mean, yeah, imagine how exciting it would be to actually find some evidence in this case after 30 years.
And all of this is just happening. It's just happening so fast. All the investigators are sitting at their computers like, when it was said that the police had, strong circumstantial evidence, but the chief of police was like, no, this is a lot, but we need the evidence. We need the DNA. And
right.
The thing about the pap smear, that I read an interview or an article with Rader's daughter, who the pap smear was taken from, the DNA was taken from. and she was mad about it. And of course, I think it is a violation of some sort of a violation of privacy. They had a warrant though, so it's not like they didn't do anything illegal.
Right.
They took all the evidence they had, they took it to a judge, and they said, "This is what we have. We need a warrant so we can do this secretly, because if we do it, if we go and ask her, she could go tell her dad, and her dad could go on the run or whatever."
Right.
So they had to do this. So I think it's warranted, and it's legally warranted. But it is a little bit of a violation of privacy, I think.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
I mean, for the sake of the greater good,
Yeah.
could be argued. But nonetheless, still a little bit of an invasion there.
Yeah, definitely. So, after all that, Rader was arrested while driving near his home in Park City shortly after noon on February 25th, 2005. An officer asked, "Mr. Rader, do you know why you're going downtown?" Rader replied, "Oh, I have suspicions why." Wichita Police, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives agents searched Rader's home and vehicle, seizing evidence including computer equipment, a pair of black pantyhose retrieved from a shed, and a cylindrical container.
The church he attended, his office at City Hall, and the main branch of the Park City Library were also searched. At a press conference the next morning, Wichita Police Chief Norman Williams announced, "The bottom line, BTK is arrested." The same day he was arrested, he was charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder. His bail was set at $10 million, and he was appointed a public defender. On May 3rd, the judge entered not guilty pleas on Rader's behalf. As Rader did not speak at his arraignment, however, on June 27th, the scheduled trial date, Rader changed his plea to guilty. He described the murders in detail and made no apologies. At Rader's August 18th sentencing, victims' families made statements, after which Rader apologized in a rambling 30-minute monologue that the prosecutor likened to an Academy Awards acceptance speech, which honestly I agree with. In his sort of monologue, he tries to almost play up to the jurors. He tries to make it seem like he's a normal guy. He actually even likens himself to his victims, which is, to me, it's pretty disgusting, man. It's
Yeah. Well, that comes back to sort of the separation
yeah,
in his two lives, as you were saying earlier. I'm sure in some respect he does liken himself to his victims, right? In his normal life, because he had a normal life.
Sure, yeah,
he had
totally.
this whole normal life that, he had kids and a family, and he had all these things, and job and everything. And so he was a normal guy for most of his life when he wasn't killing. So
right.
he has that separation,
Well, to him, the
him.
separation is there.
Exactly.
So he was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences with a minimum of 175 years. Kansas didn't have the death penalty at the time of the murders, so they couldn't pin him with that. On August 19th, he was moved to the El Dorado Correctional Facility.
Yeah, and this sort of shows how messed up the system can be sometimes because, so Casey Anthony, right, our last episode, they were seeking the death penalty for her. And as much as you can, or, as much as you do or don't agree with that, this guy definitely deserves to be put to death. I'm sort of weird about the death penalty in general. Right. I'm sort of like, okay, it just kind of depends.
Case by case basis.
Yeah, for me, yeah, exactly. For me personally, it is a case by case basis. And in this case, he should definitely be put to death. If, and that also brings up the argument, like, is death better for this kind of person? Because I think he stated, I'm pretty sure, that he's ready to die. It was sort of like in Jeffrey Dahmer's case. Mm-hmm. When Jeffrey Dahmer was caught, he was like, I'm ready to die.
Yeah.
And it's like, so putting him to death would probably be better.
I think also Ed Kemper said he didn't want to waste taxpayer money by being alive in jail, so he'd rather have the death penalty.
Yeah, he definitely wanted that. Ed Kemper?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. But like, what's his name? The pretty boy serial killer. But like with Ted Bundy, Ted Bundy, which I'm sure one day we'll do an episode on him. He did not want to die. He was like trying his hardest to lengthen the amount of time he had before he died. He did not want to die at all. So I think it kind of just depends as far as the death penalty goes. So why do you think the BTK got caught? Because a lot of people online say somehow, even if it was subconsciously, he meant to get caught. He wanted to get caught. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there is some truth to that. Like, when you start sending letters to the police bragging about your murders, taking credit for the acts he had done, I think there is a certain aspect to where I don't know if he wanted to get caught, but he wanted to be recognized for what he had done.
Yeah, he definitely wanted to get recognized. I think he eventually would have been. And we can say, so he's still alive to this day. We're in 2018, right? He was caught when he was 60 in 2005. So he's, was that 12 years? So he's 72 now. I believe that if he hadn't been caught, he would have eventually, if it had been on his deathbed or at some time in the future, he would have told somebody. There's no way he was dying with this. It just was. He had to have recognition. And I don't think that he necessarily meant to get caught. I think that he got caught because of his stupidity and because of technological changes.
Exactly. Like, the only reason he got caught is because he was ignorant of technology, in a sense.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
In some sense, and I don't know if he would have turned himself in, but I truly believe that, like, messages to the cops wouldn't have stopped, or to the media. He would have kept playing that up all day.
Yeah, probably. And, in the past, he did stop, because in 2004, that was the most he had ever communicated with the police. He usually would send one letter, and then for a few, they wouldn't hear again. They wouldn't hear from the BTK again for years, from like what, 75 to 79 or something, when he first started communicating with the police. Mm-hmm. So this was a lot. He was definitely communicating. Maybe he was getting old. Maybe he was thinking, I'm getting old and I want something to happen. Something needs to change. I could die next year. I could die in a few years and no one would know.
Right. I think there's also, I think the theme of control still applies here as well. Like, he was able to control the media, keep Wichita talking about the BTK killer and the crimes, and
still to this day, I mean, we're making a podcast episode about him.
Exactly.
And he's still alive, like I said. Yeah, and the thing is, I think if he had started killing people today, let's say that he was born 20 years in the future or whatever, 30, 40 years in the future, whatever, he was around right now, the exact same person, and he started killing people. He went to the Oteros in 2010, 2018, 2015, whatever, and killed them. There is no way he would have been able to go for 30 years.
Agreed.
There's just no way.
Totally.
He would have been caught way quicker.
I agree.
I think he wasn't smart. He was really dumb.
And he was sloppy in a lot of ways.
A lot of people say he was meticulous and he planned a lot, and I guess he sort of did. He stalked people.
Sure.
But when it came down to it, he was super sloppy.
At the end of the day, it was still a fetish for him. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like, he enjoyed stalking. It was, And
that's so true, because you know why it probably got out of control? So he would stalk these people, he'd go, and then it would sort of, as he's going along, it would get out of control, and it's because he fantasizes about everything, and then when it comes to actually doing it, he's in this, like, he's doing it, he's in his fetish world. It's no longer a fantasy. Exactly. And so you just can't control that in a real life scenario.
Yeah, his fantasies never met up with the reality of what was real and what was in his head. It was always, it never worked like he had planned.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, and that sort of makes sense. It's just not going to. His fantasies, of course, are going to be, more fantastic in his head than
Yeah.
in real life.
In
It's
some
just natural.
some sense, I agree with you. I don't believe the BTK Strangler was all that smart. However, I do think that the BTK Strangler was extremely lucky.
Oh my God, he was super lucky.
I mean, only that in the sense of he was able to get away with what he did for as long as he did. It's
Yeah, I think
pretty
that
crazy.
I think that kind of like comes back to the whole technology thing.
Yeah.
Because if he had done it in 2015, where cameras are everywhere, people are everywhere, everyone has a camera, there's no way he would have got away with it as far.
Absolutely, no doubt about it.
I think that's true for like any serial killer. I think the only way you can really be a serial killer nowadays and actually get away with it is if you're a truck driver or something. I don't know if like you could just go to Dallas, live in Dallas, which is where we're from, and kill all these people like he did and just get away with it. It's like you'd get caught quick. Doesn't matter
Right.
how smart you are, honestly.
Right, and imagine like it's weird to sort of think about this, but like in the case of the Brights, right, where Kevin got away, imagine the case where Kevin had a cell phone.
Yeah, exactly.
Would have been completely different.
Yeah, I mean, he would have called 911. He would have got shot in the face. BTK would have went away thinking he was dead. He would have called 911 right then.
Exactly.
And then maybe call 911 and then open his camera or something. Either way,
Right.
911 would be on the way. There's no way.
Exactly.
Then he comes back out, fights with Kevin again, shoots him again, then goes back in the bedroom. You think the police aren't coming by that time?
Right.
By the time he gets out and runs away. So he got way lucky on a lot of these, especially like the last one.
Right.
Dolores Davis. He's fucking everything up. He's sloppy as hell, So he's not doing great.
Well,
Super sloppy.
he's arrested now.
He's arrested now.
I also did look, just as just sort of an anecdote, I was looking on his daughter's Twitter the other day, and she is releasing a book about their sort of her views on her father now, and some stories about childhood, stuff like that, that's coming out later this year.
Oh
Just
man,
thought that was cool.
That's really interesting. I did read an article with her, and she talked about everything. I can't imagine. I mean, we talk about that for a minute. The family. Oh my
Right?
God. it's
You think you
insane.
know somebody, right?
Man, can you imagine? I can't imagine my dad. And my dad is like 50, 55, 56, something like that. He's old. Not that old. But he's only a few years younger than BTK when he was caught. I
Right.
can't imagine my dad being a serial killer. I mean, your
Yeah.
entire life has changed. His wife's name was Laura Dietz.
Paula Dietz.
Paula, right? And so she got divorced right away. The judge actually basically just said, normally divorce takes time. In this case, he allowed them to get divorced right away. Right once he was arrested, like 3 days later, she was divorced.
Yep, I read that too. That was, I mean, for good reasons. I just can't believe it.
Yeah. So that was the BTK. Very messed up. I think we covered mostly everything. I'm very happy with it. I've always been pretty fascinated with the BTK mainly because he was the family man that he was.
Right.
Mainly because he was able to be the family man, be a serial killer, and stay uncaptured for 30 years. It's always just fascinated the hell out of me, honestly. And so, we're doing what are we doing next?
So next is the Ruby Ridge. Not a conspiracy anymore, but the event, more like.
The events of Ruby Ridge. That's gonna be our next episode. Look for it in 2 weeks. Next week we are gonna release some more scary story narrations. Some good ones, I think. We're getting better at that, so that's good. So yeah, Ruby Ridge is coming up, and we have some more planned after that. Ed Kemper will eventually come up. I think after Ruby Ridge, I want to do one that's a lot less known, but is absolutely insane. I'm not going to tell you what that is now. But Ed Kemper will probably come. Catherine Knight is probably coming eventually. If we ever make it to episode 50, I want to do Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yes.
Yeah.
I say for episode 10, or not for episode 10, for episode 100, we do a top 10 serial killer list, and then we tier them up and like make them fight for the champion for like the worst serial killer ever. I thought that would be interesting.
Yeah, we'll see. That sounds. I don't know who would win.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably Ed Kemper.
Maybe.
He's huge.
Brute force and
intelligence.
Yeah.
Dude was smart as hell.
Yep.
We're watching Mindhunters today.
I gotta get on it, man.
Yeah, the first episode's kind of weird. I don't think Stephanie's liking it as much as I do, but the first episode's kind of weird. The second episode is awesome. Yeah, the second episode was way more interesting because they're just talking to Ed Kemper, and BTK makes a very small appearance. We're only on episode 2. I know he's in episode 3 because I accidentally saw like the first 5 seconds.
Is he in his ADT?
He's in his ADT costume.
Of course.
He's in his ADT costume. So again, check us out on all platforms. We're on our website's Strangeland Pod, www.strangelandpod.com. Facebook.com/Strangeland Podcast. Same thing as SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/Strangeland Podcast. We're on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and we're on pretty much every Android and Apple podcast app that you can find on their individual app stores. And I hope to be on, we hope to be on Spotify soon. Spotify's kind of a pain in the ass, so hopefully they hear that and then they let us on, but I doubt it. But I think in the next few months we'll be on Spotify. And we're also on YouTube. If you just search up YouTube, the Strangeland Podcast, you'll come across our episodes. Again, we have narration, horror story narrations, and we have these episodes that we're doing.
Yeah, and make sure you guys like and subscribe to the YouTube page, and also leave us a comment. What do you want to hear next? Let us know. We're interested.
And our email is thestrangelandpodcast@gmail.com. Send us anything. If you hate it, send us an email. If you love it, send us an email. And if you have suggestions,
we love hate mail.
Oh, yeah. I would love to communicate with anybody. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Have a good night.